Excuse me, Mr. DJ.
Hey, check this out. We got a great show coming your way.
From the ECSI Sports Studios, it's the Midday Market Report with Jeff Dawson.
ECSI fans, do you want to revolutionize your sports? ECSI fans, do you want to revolutionize your sports investing habits? Allow me to tell you about WagerWire. WagerWire is an app that helps you become a superior bettor by allowing you to sync all of your sports books and track all of your bets in one place. See your current action, your betting history, and stats. You can also sign up for sportsbooks and collect bonus offers. Follow them at WagerWire on X, as they're the best account on the platform. Head to the App Store or Play Store now and search WagerWire to download the app.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am the host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and this is the Dawg and Desperado Fantasy Football Show, episode 16, November 3rd, 2023. The weekend is here. It's that time of weekend, or week, I should say, that myself and Shawn will put his head together and try to take down that $1 million grand prize over at DraftKings in the Millie Maker. First and foremost, shout out to our new sponsor and partnership with WagerWire. If you have not downloaded the app, please download the app at Google Play or wherever you download the apps. Get accustomed to it. Start keeping track of your wagers and your ROI. There's some great promos, free wagers from a bunch of sports books that they are working with as well. And it's less than 2 months away from Christmas. So if you're looking for a little flashcast to become an affiliate, send a email to affiliate@wagerwire.com. Travis, Zach will take good care of you and the rest of their team. Tell them JD sent you from ECSI. Without further ado, let's bring in the Hall of Famer. It's week 9 of the NFL. Holy cow. Before you know it, we're going to be talking playoffs. The one and only Mr. Shawn Childs.
Yeah, this is a year anniversary of
good afternoon.
This Sunday is a year anniversary of the big day in the DFS market. So I would like the stars to align again, but we'll see. And definitely an interesting board for the daily games this week.
We were talking backstage, and a lot of the big stars are not available for the $1 Million Maker. Miami and Kansas City playing in Frankfurt, Germany at 9:30. So your Tyreek Hills, your Tuas, your Waddles, your Mahomes, your Kelces, your Pacheco's off the board. At 8:20, Bills at Cincinnati. A year ago, they started to play, and that's when I'm drawing a brain. I was going to say Denny Hamlin. Jesus, now I'm in NASCAR. The injury that stopped the game and actually was a big Hamler was a big focal point in fantasy the last week, what to do with that game. But no Josh Allen, no Stephon Diggs, maybe no Gabe Davis. Tight end Kincaid coming on a little there. And then, of course, on Cincinnati, Burrow, Chase, T. Higgins back. And then Monday night, no Justin Herbert, no Keenan Allen. So when you wake up and take a look at this, Shawn, initially, and you're scratching all these off, where's the mindset? Am I going to find a quarterback, or you looking for over-unders? How does that work?
Well, it starts with when you do the projections and you slot everybody in, you try to be fair about it. And then when you have there's a couple of quarterbacks, I think 2 or 3 of them I already have to update and change. Fields isn't going to play. I put him in. So, we kind of know what his backup has done a little bit. We're going to have Minnesota were, a big downgrade at quarterback, playing somebody else. Looks like the Arizona is going to have Toon playing. I kind of thought he was interesting earlier if he got a chance to start. And then we have Stafford getting replaced, downgrade there with Ripien. So there's a lot of cloudiness, and when you have the change of quarterbacks, obviously it's reflective of the overall scoring of the offense, and takes out the ceiling of the potential of the wide receivers. The only one that's a change at quarterback probably that's not that big a deal for me is Atlanta. Heineke is played a couple of years and has enough experience. Seemed like he's kind of like a spark plug type of guy and can sneak in a good game. Drake London looks like he's trending to not play, so that is a factor of them, at least passing the ball, and they don't really have any other wide receiver that looks viable. So, it's messy on the quarterback side, and so that's obviously messy on the other side. And then you throw in, a lot of running backs are off for the bye weeks anyways, and some star receivers with Denver, Jacksonville, San Francisco, and not Jacksonville. What was the other one? Detroit. Yeah. So an interesting week for sure, and kind of piecemeal it together and see if you can come up with a right game that's high scoring, and land on a couple of players and maybe have impact games.
I'm going to transition to the regular season. Well past the halfway point for you. In some of your leagues, you got about a 3-4 week window before some of the playoffs start. I always circle back to 2017, week 13, 1 week, actually 2 weeks before the regular season is over. I had no starting quarterbacks, and I picked up 3 on the waiver wire or the scrap heap, and obviously rode Bortles to the promised land. A lot of quarterbacks got injured last week. Now, for me, I had Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins wasn't my focal point. I had a lot of Kirk Cousins as my number 2, which in some spots now I have been just starting him, obviously, before the injury. It was tough to look at this week and then also to do the projections for what they are projected to do for the rest of the season. So I ended up with a handful of Taylor Heineke's. I like the projection that Bryce Young is going. I couldn't take a Dobbs because I needed a fill-in this week for a couple of the Cousins teams. I have like some cousin Murray teams. I have some cousin Deshaun Watson teams. Also, Jalen Hurts is off next week, so I needed to fill that one if I didn't have a number 2. Waiver wire, and I know you got a bazillion teams in the quarterback market for regular season and the high stakes. How did you tackle that on the waiver wire on Wednesday?
A few teams I had a decent second quarterback, and actually some teams last week I added a third quarterback. You just never know, and and if you have an injury of a dead player, you got to get rid of somebody and add somebody else. So my first choice was against the grain. Most were willing to pay for the young Levis for Tennessee, and I kind of gravitated to Daniel Jones because he's coming off an injury, but he offers running ability, which helps his floor. That team hasn't scored much, but get a couple players on the offensive line. I think they'll move the ball better, and some of their receivers, have no value right now, but they could be, Hyatt or whatever, maybe could have a better second half of the year. So I went with him. More so, I figured maybe get 60 yards rushing, maybe a rushing touchdown. Even if he gets 150 to 200 yards passing, he's kind of be okay. Ideally, I don't want to have him as the main guy that I'm going to ride. I still have Watson on some teams. If I did have a spot for a third quarterback and I lost Cousins, I did put Dobbs here and there just to see what happens and have a piece of the Vikings offense, especially if Jefferson came back. But, there was one league I actually, Fields was out there, and I had Purdy on a bye week. And I put a bid for like 156. I had like $475. And I bid 156. The runner-up was 56 for Fields, and I got Fields. So, but right now I have Fields and Purdy. So I didn't want to put in for a second quarterback. I didn't know who I was going to, drop or whatever. So I wanted to see if I got Fields before I went, to the second waiver wire period to see, like, all right, who do I really want to start this week? So there's still 5 or 6 guys in there, and I think I already addressed that. But, I think Fields is a pretty good, pickup for, potential in his schedule if, he gets back to the field and plays how he was midseason and in how he did last year. So it's interesting because I didn't really gravitate to like the Atlanta quarterback to start this week, but I look, like I said, a little more for Jones, a little bit different than most there, especially I figured he'd be cheaper. But when you're the Cousins guy, you were the only one who really kind of had to get a quarterback, so the prices should have been lower than they were, other than maybe the Tennessee player quarterback drawing attention after a big game.
Yeah, I with Dobbs, that would have been my number one, expecting him to start next week. I wasn't running to the window on the Levis guy, just short week, big second half, obviously, on Sunday. Listen, the kid can throw. He's not afraid of the big stage. Showed flashes again last night. And then, so again, for me, even some Mac Jones, where the schedule does set up well. I know we talked backstage about their receivers and stuff. There are no Kendrick Bourne now. I have seen Douglas start to emerge a little over there. I don't know what to expect from Juju. Hunter Henry. Again, I ended up with a Mac Jones on the bench just as a flyer, just in case I get stuck. My question back to you on Daniel Jones. That pig called Darren Waller, he was a star for me one year. He got me twice. I said never again. I didn't buy the sizzle as he was steamrolling up in August and early September, up the rankings in the high stakes market. Comes out this week and, Hammy's, just not there. I'm going to be out a few more weeks. That didn't slow you down at all, thinking about, no Waller. I know Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, you got a healthy Barkley now, but no Waller didn't affect that at all either.
No, I mean, Waller was doing okay. I mean, if considering how bad their passing offense has been and their offensive line, Waller is, he's been okay. Not enough touchdowns or whatever, and he played better the last couple of weeks. So it's like I said, it's more of, thinking what Jones did last year. His completion rate's decent. He did obviously turn the ball over a lot more this year. And but the offensive line, giving up the sacks, right behind Washington. I don't even know where they came out of last week's game because, Washington, only gave up 1 sack. I don't know what the Giants ended up giving up. But, so like I said, it's more, looking for a running quarterback that, can potentially improve his passing. And, it's more of not a 1 week pickup, more of a long term, because I might have to rely on, I don't know who, I had Cousins on a lot of teams, so I don't know who my other quarterback is. Even if I have like a Brock Purdy, I mean, he kind of like, he's not that sexy, whatever. He's like a 250, 2 touchdown type of guy, give me the potentially 20 points in our formats. But, he's not a guy that's going to get too many 35-point games. So where, Jones can pop in once in a while and have that impact game when he gets the passing yards with the rushing yards and, gets the touchdown. So he doesn't look too sexy. The Waller thing was like, obviously it wasn't that much of a factor for me this week, even though I thought I had to play him. So it's more of the offensive line. So, we'll see how that goes this week. And I think he was scooped up in all leagues. I probably ended up with him if he was in the league. So we'll see.
And that's the thing with these injuries, and every week it's someone else going down, and the loss of these quarterbacks, not only creates havoc for us, it also, deflates some of the players that have been on the uptick. I'm thinking of Cousins and the fact that Jordan Addison has really played well, and the thought of maybe Justin Jefferson coming back in a couple of weeks. Some of the other quarterbacks, you talked about Stafford, Cooper Kupp's back there. Puka now banged up a little. Tutu has slowed down his looks. The Ritter demotion now, as you said, Heineke. I really like the thought process with Heineke. He does have some weapons, but as you said, Drake London now trending to be out. Maybe a Van Jefferson or a Hollins can step up for a week there. I'm going to ask you before we go into this week's slate here. Seems like Bryce Young is starting to trend in the right direction. Do you like what you see there? He does have some weapons. I had 0 shares of Adam Thielen. I mean, he's had a remarkable year. Got a rookie over there, Jonathan Mingo. It did come out today. Chuba Hubbard will be the starting running back over there. What's your thoughts of Young today and moving forward?
Yeah, Young is an interesting player. Obviously, slow start to the year, but Thielen's really kind of carried the load there and been a lot more impressive than you thought. And I know he had one of those games in Seattle when Dalton was behind center. But, overall, they have one good receiver. They don't throw to the tight end a lot. The running back position looks messy. Sanders has been hurt. Hubbard's obviously he said he was starting, but he was obviously looking like he had the inside track the last 2 or 3 weeks. So, in order for Young to be even viable at any fantasy market, he needs some other receiver, somebody else to step up, add some scoring ability. And I don't see, Mingo could improve and he looks like he's trending forward, but, I don't see him being like a 7 for 70 guy and a touchdown right away. Marshall's kind of like wanted to be traded out of town. And, Chark has just, had that one game, but he had like 11 targets and 3 catches and a touchdown or something. So, without that second receiver, I mean, a lot is relying on Thielen to move the chains. And we would think, it's been kind of a weird year. Like, when somebody ticket comes in week after week after week, you don't think it's going to happen again. We've been playing fantasy football for a long time. The best players have, they get 20 points, they get 12 points, they get 22 points, they get 15 points. They don't go 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, like kind of like what A.J. Brown has done. And even Thielen had like 3 or 4 really good games in a row. And you would have thought, well, you think somebody would defend him, at least not get him a touchdown. But so without having secondary receiving options, I think he's a tougher start. I think he can get away with it maybe this week or here or there, especially in a bye week. But, he's not a guy that you can trust, to rely on like over the long course of the second half of the year. I think he'll get better. And he doesn't really add too much value in the run game. So that's kind of a strike too for his, explosiveness. So he's just, I think he'll get better. Just needs a better, secondary receiver, and Thielen can only go so far for me. I mean, at some point he'll slow down and not get as many chances.
You brought up AJ Brown. Listen, in August, as we're getting ready for the start of the year, as we're drafting all our teams. Listen, I'm a big AJ Brown fan. I can't lie, but I loved the progression of Devonta Smith year to year. True professional, great route runner, great hands, and just watching Philly last year and the expectations this year, and even as they started the year, DeAndre Swift with that monster game. They have a 2-3-headed monster. And then after, I think it was week 2, I think it was when A.J. Brown started bitching that he wasn't getting the ball enough. Jalen Hurts has now made him a focal point. And I'm not taking anything away what A.J. Brown has done the last 4 weeks. I think it is 125 yards plus, the catches, the touchdowns. We're not saying he's not elite. But outside looking in, Shawn, are they a better team with him force reading A.J. Brown and less of Devonta Smith, less of DeAndre Swift, less of Goddard moving forward?
Well, Brown has been phenomenal for 6 games. And I don't think – I think obviously that, these players want to win and they want to get a ball and be a star. But he's a guy that gets open and can make plays, and he scored touchdowns. He had 11 last year. I think coming out of the gate for the first couple of weeks for Philly is that their offensive line was supposed to be one of the best in the game, but they were giving up a lot of pressure, and they really kind of struggled against – I think that game was against Tampa when Swift kind of like stabilized the offense. He made a lot of big runs, got him going and stuff like that. And he had that 170 yards and kind of transitioned the game. And, you saw a couple of weeks ago, I think they were playing against Miami. I mean, you saw Hurts have that long window to pass the ball and get it downfield. So, their progression of offense is getting better. You saw the last 2 games, they scored 69 points. Obviously it's against Washington, and they scored in the other game against Washington, but they're a lot better passing ball team than people thought even coming into the year. But Brown is a really, really good player. He's averaged in DraftKings scoring in the last 6 weeks, 30 points a game. I think Smith's has the potential to be a lot better, but he's had those moments in games this year where he's had some, open passes and drops, and maybe it's not perfectly thrown to him, but you can see on the field that Brown is the explosive player. He's on a phenomenal pace. He can beat a defense deep. He's starting to get a little more short stuff. So he is progressed further where Smith is kind of trailing last year, but he's not that far behind where he can't still have a better year than last year, and he will have his game. So the overall package, adding Swift, the two receivers, and the tight end is pretty impressive. And I think that team's going to, move forward offensively and move the ball. And the problem with them is actually on the defensive side of the ball because they haven't had as much pressure on the quarterback. They've given up a lot more points. And even their secondary was, last week, they look clueless against Washington. So I think if they don't get to where they were last year and have those shorter fields, and maybe that would Philly would score more. But last year, Philly scored 31% of their possessions, 31.7. This year, they're scoring touchdowns only like 24%. So they're kicking field goals and stuff, scoring a lot, but they're not finishing drives. But they did do better in the last couple of games. So I think that, overall, I think Brown deserves the ball, and he does get open. And, he's probably right on the pace where he's trailing, Tyreek Hill. I mean, he has a chance to get really close to him because of his big playability, and he's getting those secondary catches and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting how it shakes out. So I didn't consider him, I actually did it. If you're doing those best ball things, I did take Brown a couple times, 4th overall, to try to pair him in the best balls with Devontae Smith and Hurts. And that's the only way you could do it is if you move them up. So I tried to do that, and that weekly winners thing at Underdog. Half the teams I did with Hurts, Brown, and whatever, because I thought that they had the highest scoring potential to hit in more games. And we've won a little bit of money back that, but Brown looks like he's just a beast. You know what I mean? He's just, and he commands the ball and he gets open, and, defenses, have to figure out how to take him away. And I don't see a lot of defenses, showing the ability to do it this year. You see Hill come back, a big game after big game, just it's an interesting year for some of the elite players, receivers, and even some running backs in, this year.
Aaron wants to know, would you trade Breece Hall and Laporta for Kamara? He has Travis Kelce.
Breece Hall in Laporta for Kamara. Obviously Kamara's missed 3 games. He's 9th in scoring. I think Breece Hall might be really close to him too. Saints scored more last week. It's interesting. The problem is that, Hill's going to snipe some of Kamara's touchdowns, and a lot of Kamara's catches. He had like 25 of his catches in 2 games. So I think overall, I think I like the direction of Hall better. I think that the Jets won't score as much, but I think he's going to get the 20 catches, and he's going to be more explosive. I think you're gaining something, but you're giving away a player. I don't think it's I don't think it's a big enough upgrade for me. Maybe if I cleared all the bye weeks and stuff like that and given the insurance policy, even though Kamara's doing well, I just I do like Hall a lot, and I just don't think that realistically the Saints, you consider them like a team that would score 25 or 30 points a game at this point of the season. Carr's okay, he passes the ball, has some decent weapons, and but Jets don't score, but Hall's going to get his stuff. So it's closer than you think. I'd probably hang on to the players, but with Kelce, you can give away the extra player. But if you're going to do that, why don't you get some other kicker back? You know what I mean? Even if it's a small piece of the puzzle, some other way that helps your team. So interesting trade, but I don't know. I think I would stand pat maybe.
And I personally would stand pat as well, because 2 reasons. I like Hall long-term over Kamara. Nothing against Kamara. He's come back and he's been great. Derek Carr has been, I've called him check down Charlie. As you said, he had 25 catches in 2 games. Now he's trying to stretch the field with Rashid. Olave gets one off of the helmet, would have had a big touchdown. It hasn't been a fluid offense over there. And the fact of the matter is that you got a young upstart back with Brees Hall, as you said. But the real big thing here, Aaron, is yes, you have Kels, who still isn't 100%. And even with Laporta on your bench, you're keeping it away from someone else. So I, too, would stand pat there. But thank you so much for the question. Let's go to this week, Shawn. We're trying to win $1 million. We're trying to thread a needle. There's a lot of backup quarterbacks. There's a lot of quarterbacks that you cannot take this week because of the game in Germany, because of Buffalo, Cincinnati, because Herbert is playing Monday night in New York. So if you want, start from the ass back. If there was you grab the bottom feeder on defense, maybe some defense that's standing out against a lesser quarterback. Couple wide receivers, a running back, and of course the quarterback. Where are your eyes sitting right now?
It's interesting because you just talked about Kamara. So I think that I'm behind schedule right now this week, and I had to play out, and I played in a golf tournament yesterday that took away a little bit of my time. So my head wasn't wrapped around playing the daily as much. But I mean, they do the projections on Tuesday, but it's really difficult. You do the projections Tuesday, and I know 3 or 4 days later there's going to be so many quarterback changes, which are going to affect a lot of stuff. So I don't have the right information to kind of get it right, and it makes no sense to keep changing or single layer and uploading it and stuff like that. So I usually do the second update sometime later today. I want all the news to clear, so I'll either do it tonight or tomorrow morning and have it for the weekend, and that gives me a clearer picture of what's going on. So, I kind of want to write this article, and I just need to do it. But it's like these rules of if you follow this in daily, you can eliminate some bad decisions. And I think one of them is, does an offense have all their key players healthy, and are they kind of clicking? And I think that's an important factor when you're trying to put together, especially a quarterback, wide receiver stack or something like that. If you're saying you're playing. We're talking about the Eagles. If Smith was injured and he had Brown, you might get excited or whatever. But if one player's out, it kind of hurts their ability to move the ball. And even score. So, what teams are healthy and has that team been trending forward offensively or playing well in a unit? So, that's what I try to consider, focus on the last 2 or 3 weeks a lot in, who's playing a little better and who's moving in the right direction. And it's not as easy as that because, we got bye weeks in the mix like that. So we talked about Kamara, and Kamara has a pretty good game against the Bears. They should score in that game. Carr threw the ball a little bit better. The Bears defense will give up some points. They do play pretty good against the run. And not give up a ton of touchdowns. But at some point, these teams have played well against the run. There's going to be that correction game on the other side where, if they're averaging allowing 3.3 yards per rush, I mean, typically the league average should get to 4.3. And some of those teams, there's only going to be a couple teams that are, their defenses allow less than four yards per rush, and I think some of those teams will give it back. So even though the Bears have played well, I think that there's some regression when game score gets out of line and the teams will kind of run the ball. So Kamara makes a lot of sense. And you kind of look like people are going to be tossing Barkley's touched the ball a ton. He's getting, offensive linemen back. He's getting the quarterback back, so they should move more. But the problem with Barkley is now you got a quarterback that runs the ball a little bit. So he's going to, he had 30-something touches last week, or 30, or he'd have 39 last week or something crazy like that. But, he had a heavy workload last week. But this week, you got the quarterback that could run the ball 6 or 7 times. And I know he's coming off a neck injury, but the quarterback's going to take some of it. Plus, the quarterback could snipe at the touchdown. And the Giants, I think they scored 1 touchdown or less in 6 of their 7 or games or something like that. They scored 3 or 4 against I think 4 in Arizona in week 2, but they haven't scored hardly at all in the other games. And that's, like I said, offensive line. So, Barkley to Kamara, I mean, they're close and whatever, but, to me, Kamara is just a better all-around player, and then the Saints should create more scoring chances. So he kind of makes sense as the first piece to the puzzle at running back. Jacobs, gets the touches, the offense back up, exactly what I was saying. here it is. Jacobs is playing with a backup quarterback that has one game of experience, but we don't know if the guy can throw any touchdown passes or finish off drives in the red zone. So that's a strike for for Jacobs to play. I mean, but they might rely on the run game, and maybe that matchup should be favorable. But the Giants have played better the last 3 games defensively as far as points scored. So, like, that's a strike for him. We got Breece Hall on the off night. We got Mixon off. We got Eckler out. Mostert's off. Pacheco's off. So now, I mean, we're got, like, limited names. So, like, on the top shelf, it's Kamara. Either you decide if you want to use him or not, and that would probably be a factor of you using an ace receiver. And then the next step is like, all right, I got one good running back. So, who do I want to focus on at quarterback, wide receiver? Is there a hookup? Unfortunately, last week I was on the right wide receiver with CeeDee Lamb. He had the big game, and I identified him as a must play. But I thought Dallas offense would play well against the Rams, and they did. But the run game didn't come along for the ride, which the game score should have been. But I should have had Dak with Lamb, and I probably would have cashed on my single ticket. But that's a mistake in my decision making and team build. But most of the time I'm trying to hit on this one roster. But so I have kind of cycled back where you mentioned Baker Mayfield, and I looked at it and I have Evans rated pretty good, but I like the Stroud's been relatively quiet, and people kind of gravitated towards him last week. And I didn't think it was a good game. I thought that would kind of be one of those grinder games, where they're. It looks like Carolina's got a really bad defense and they should go on the road, and end up being both teams kind of ran the ball more, and it was low scoring, like 15-13. But I think coming home, this game makes a little more sense for Stroud because he has a little more potential. Collins has had 2 big games at home. His upside, Dell was coming off an injury last week. The concussion was kind of quiet. So, like, Dell's a factor, and even the tight end can sneak in. So you could play Collins with one of the other 2 receivers and Stroud, and that gives you a pretty good structure of low-value players together. And I think Tampa moves the ball enough to, score, a couple of touchdowns. And, Houston can give up points against a run, but Tampa just doesn't score rushing touchdowns. So Mayfield, if he's going to score, or if Tampa's going to score, Mayfield's going to have to throw touchdown passes. So I think Evans makes sense to be on the side because he's the scorer, where Godwin's the chain mover, doesn't score that many touchdowns anymore for some reason, lack of quarterback play or in the red zone. So, you can use Evans with 2 Tennessee guys, Kamara, and then the Breece Hall, and then you just kind of have to fill it in. And I mentioned earlier offline that Bijan Robinson was an important player for me this week. He's 6,100. Coming off his first rushing touchdown, 11 for 62, was on the field like 74% of the time. Algier's been a factor in kind of getting in the way, and I know they don't get to the goal line that often, but when they get to the 5-yard line, Algier's like the back that's been in there. But at some point, that's going to have to switch because Algier, the last 6 games, is averaging like 2.9 yards per rush. He's just not doing anything exciting. And if they play from the lead and the game score changed, he could be more of a factor. And he had a chance 2 weeks ago, and he really didn't get it done when Robinson was sick. So I think that the transition should be to the more explosive player. The change to quarterbacks, I think, is going to be a win for Robinson this week. Just maybe short term. I think Riddle will get back in that game, and I think he's viable to pick up off the waiver wire, as a buy and hold type of thing for somebody who needs a depth. But so Robinson's in. Kamara makes sense. So I got that too. You gravitate towards, the Houston players. You go to, you got the guy against, which really is a factor. Like Chris Schinker really likes to do that. And I like it in some matchups when it makes sense, but sometimes you don't really want to force it. And if I wanted to kind of squeeze in a second running back, I think Jonathan Taylor makes sense in that range if I didn't want to use Robinson, because Carolina's given up 15 touchdowns to running backs, and I think 7 teams have at least 2 touchdowns from their running back. So even if he gets 1 and he gets his yards and a few catches, and that game kind of a little more wide open, because Indy's played in a lot of high scoring games this year, but that Taylor's a factor, and he was on the field like 61% of the snaps. But Moss just doesn't go away. He's overachieved expectations, and he's 5,800, but he makes him a harder play because so it's ultimately who scores the touchdowns, and that's a big factor there. So that's kind of like the opening structure, and then you kind of see what you got, and then when you're doing the millionaire maker, you might use, another low quarterback and try to see if you can find some other combinations of receiver and wide receiver thing to pair with your running backs you want to lean on. And the tight end position looks really kind of crappy this week because of the same situation with the bye weeks and Kelsey off, and Andrews is really high, good player and stuff like that, but he's like 6,800. But if your structure fit and you can fit him in, maybe. But Seattle players are interesting to me because they don't, they're kind of they're against the grain. I think the Ravens can still get beat in the secondary, just somebody hasn't done it yet, and Seattle hasn't shown anything to kind of say that they're ready to have an explosive passing game. They're 5-2 in one games, but they just haven't got that where they just drive the ball with a pass. Walker's look pretty good at times, but I think they, eventually they'll kind of be a better team all around in scoring. So kind of an interesting. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that outlook?
I want to go back to your initial statement. Teams that are rounding into form, teams that have been playing well, teams that are healthy. Aren't you talking about the Ravens this week?
Well, I was on the Raven two weeks ago. And I think that Bateman looks really close. I think last week he had like 2 for 34 on a rush for 18 things, and his snap count was up to like 65. So I think he's a wild card factor in a sneaky back end play this week. And I used him. I thought he was a good bye week cover in the season long and stuff like that. So I think they are going in the right direction. But Seattle's defense has played pretty good, and it's actually been surprising that Gus Edwards, for him to have 3 rushing touchdowns last week, you would have thought Lamar would have snuck one in, but you don't expect him to be like that. But I mean, they are playing better, and but last week, I mean, you can say that they didn't play well offensively. Lamar had his worst game as yards per pass attempt and per rush against an Arizona team that wasn't very good. So I think, yes, they are moving in the right direction. Played really well 2 weeks ago at home against Detroit, and Seattle actually played against Detroit and moved the ball as well against them and beat them in Detroit earlier in the year. So, but yeah, I mean, the Ravens are a factor for me. The problem is that, when you're going to the Ravens, you're starting with Lamar Jackson. He's 8,200. If I'm going to use Lamar Jackson, I'm going to use Andrews. He's 6,800. Now I got 15,000. Then I have to decide, do I want Flowers or do I want the cheap third receiver, which, the third receiver definitely is more viable in like a $20 million maker game than a single lineup or a cash game type of format. But so I think that makes sense. And that game stack for the Seattle players are going to be in play on the other side as well. So I think that I'm not dismissing that game. It's just a matter of, what can you put Kamara in that lineup? Can you put in, another AJ Brown in the lineup like that? Can you put in some other big name? And that's the trick of the team building when you're doing that. So interesting. Like I said, I had him two weeks ago and should have had him. Jackson should have had a ton more than he had if Detroit would have scored any touchdowns.
Yeah, and thinking of that again, we were on the Ravens some time ago as that team that is built to slow down and potentially beat Kansas City come December and January. I too said all last week and the week before, shame on the Ravens not to get on the horn and to add Sweat or add a Chase Young on the defensive side. I thought that would have been the cherry on top. But knowing how you think, I'm thinking of you out loud here with a Jackson, an Andrews, and then your 2 sneaky plays on the other side. Obviously, Njibger has scored the last 2 weeks. He's slowly rounding into form. And then you talked about Bateman as well. So I was thinking of you out loud. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you stuck your core in and then you added the 15,000 with Jackson and Andrews, and then your 2 short plays are Bateman and an Njigba, maybe you might be able to squeeze that one in.
Yeah, the Ravens have played, I think, they played one game overseas, but they've only played 3 games in Baltimore this year. So that, they got that it's always when you look at these teams' records and you're like, oh, this team's done really well, this team's done really bad. And then you look at like, well, they played mostly home games or road games or their relationship. So they've played really well with kind of a tougher schedule as far as sites and, away games or the away game split. Maybe not so much as, all the teams. I mean, they played the Bengals on the road, they played Cleveland on the road, and they played Pittsburgh on the road, all division games. And that's a pretty good division. But they played Houston at home. They struggled, only scored 9 points. And then Indy scored 22. And I'm sorry. I'm looking at their defense did that. Sorry. They scored 25 against Houston, 15 against Indy at home. And then they scored 38 against Detroit. And then, last week they scored, the last 3 weeks, they've scored, what is it, 24, 38, and 31. So, like you said, they are trending forward. They did have 6 field goals in Tennessee overseas, but they run the ball better, scoring rushing touchdowns. And, like last week, it's just Lamar just didn't have the room to play and pass the ball, and that should come back this week. And he was sacked 4 times, which has been the case in 3 other games this year. He was sacked 4 times, which you don't usually think that. The Ravens actually defense has got they have what do they have, sacks? Where is their sacks? Their quarterback has, I think, they had 31 sacks. I mean, they really didn't have to add that much more. They're on the pace for like 60 sacks. They're doing pretty good pressure on the ball. So interesting a matchup there. But their defensive plays well. So
before we transition out of here, Mr. Childs, mindset for someone, you had your big week right around now last year, so you're at week 9, you set an X amount of bankroll. This is what I'm going to do on a week-to-week basis. If you're pushing in 500 a week and you're not obviously cashing the big one, maybe you're getting 200 or 300 back. Some weeks you might not get anything back. It's just the nature of the beast. Can you help out the newcomer that, let's say, 8 weeks in, that hasn't sniffed it, getting down on it? What's the mindset for someone like yourself that's been doing this for so long? And again, we're honest, you're not pushing in like the whales, 5,000-10,000 a week. You got a certain syndicate, you got a certain group of amount of money that you push in. It hasn't been a great start. You haven't cashed the big one, but last year around this time, you hit DraftKings for 300,000. So teach the people how to stay positive and how to, not just to get stupid and say, I'm halfway through my bankroll. I know there's 8-9 weeks left. The hell with it. I'm just pushing all in this week. If I lose, then I don't have to look at it the rest of the year.
Yeah, it's a interesting dilemma because, you could be the 50-50 guy, then try to play those 50-50s and build a bankroll and put in $5 or $10 and play these other games and put single lineups and try to build it that way. Or you could be the home run hitter, which I classify myself as, is that, I'm trying to tee up and win $1 million. And I told my friend Chris Schenker is realistically, in DraftKings, they have the $1 million maker. It's $20 entry fee to win $1 million. Most you can put in is 150 teams, and that's $3,000. Well, I can never put in $3,000. That'd be crazy. I'd have to win a ton of money or win $1 million to do that. So, but I told him realistically I should be trying to win 100,000 and playing in the $3 one where it's a 20-man max, where that's probably more in my range, where I can play him. But I looked at it last year is that the DraftKings final has such an impressive prize pool that I wanted to try to get there, and I wanted to be in a range where I thought that I could compete and not, go beyond my bankroll. So I decided to enter the qualifiers of $125 or below, and figure that this probably averages about $175 a week, but that's a loss leader for the whole year. If you're going to lose for it should get not 17 weeks because it's 15. So I'm pretty much losing $3,000 because I might cash in that and be small a little bit here or there, but I'd have to come in the top 3 or 4 to get anything even to maintain like even 50% of my bankroll in that game. But in the Millionaire Maker, when you're trying to do it, if you put in whatever teams you put in there, if I put in, say, 15, 20 teams and I maintain a third of my bankroll on the average, I think I did pretty good unless I got it right, then I could pop. But what I did was I gravitated to the single entry for $100 and the 350, a 150 3-team max. So those events, the $100 one either has like 4,400 or 5,000 for a single. So you got to beat a lot of people to get in it. And I won last year, and I've really started only doing that in the last, say, year and a half. So, but the chances of winning that are, 17 weeks in a year times 10, that's 170 times, it's, you're not going to hit that often, right? So I was fortunate in the range, and then the 3-team max, the entry fees around 3,700. So, but I think if you're starting in trying to do it, you want to play at the lower range where you don't have to play against somebody that can put 150 teams in. You want to put, 3-team max, single entries or whatever. Pick your team. If you didn't get it right, some in those lower, especially if you do with the smaller fields where, instead of 3,700, you do 700, your scores of winning those will be a lot less. People got one shot, and it's hard to get a lineup right. You can get 3 or 4 pieces right and get a couple half pieces, but to get it all right is really difficult. But you try to be consistent. Try not to, even when I'm writing, is like, just say last year, I got creamed in September by using Justin Fields, and then you're like, why did I lost to this guy? And then you're like, when you're writing on it, you don't want to keep saying, hey, use Josh Fields again. You don't want to hit somebody over the head and keep using the same thing. But eventually, when he started playing better, he was trending. He played good in New England. Went to Dallas. You thought it was a bad matchup, and they moved the ball, and then they went home and faced Miami, and it was a perfect situation where his salary was like $5,300. He was running the ball. They were looking like it to do something, and his 2 receivers, Kmet and Mooney, were relatively cheap, so they only had to get like 50 points altogether, the 3 of them, to kind of pay off, and they got maybe 90 or something like that. And I think the score that we put up with that team that week was like 240, but the reason that got reached to such a high level was because Mixon had that monster 50-point game, which is another story. But anyways, but you could see that there was value in that offense, and that's kind of what you're looking for, is how to put those 3 players together. And it showed a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta when Ritter was relatively low price. He was facing I think it was the game. This game we got to. Was it against Washington when he had stuff? Yeah, it was a couple of whatever. It was a couple of games ago. It might have been actually against Washington that the tight end scored. Pitts looked like Washington would give some stuff up. He runs a little bit. London looked like he was a value. London was like 9 for like 124. Pitts had a touchdown. So like those 3 pieces, you put them together, and it's like, I don't want to use 3 of a bad offense, but if a player's like $3,800, he only needs like a 14 or 15, but you need the other 2 players to do something. So it's always tricky when so you look for the low value, offense that's kind of together, and then try to fit in the big pieces that match up for the week that are hot. And if you have like one layer of, like, I was focusing on say I had Jamar Chase, and that's why I lost and didn't win the overall. But if I had like one layer with Jamar Chase, but then I had another layer with Tyreek Hill and another layer with AJ Brown, I cover that ace lead running receiver, and I create more outs where I might get it right. So it's not like a dog track where we have an all factor, because we can't play an all because it's too many of them. But you can play the best players, because you need impact players, and there's only realistically, I would think there's only like 8 to 10 in most weeks that have a chance to go off, and they're most likely the good players. Like this week, we talked about Kamara, we talked about AJ Brown. So what other groups of players this week can potentially score 30-something points, and it's not that much. So I think that's the main thing is team building, identify the star players, be consistent what you want to do. and then you want to play in a range where you don't have to beat the teams with 150 teams. But I don't fear that people, because I know that those people are putting in more money and stuff, and they have more at risk. But I think I can win the Millionaire Maker. I haven't done it, but I've been in the hunt, and I think that there's weeks if I made a different decision, I would have been really close. So I think I could win it. Will that ever align? Who knows? Will I chase that forever? Maybe. But that's why you play the game, because it's we love football, and it's like there is so much action on Sunday, especially if you got a DFS team that kind of does it. And especially if like the hardest thing is, like, you could have the first half of a game, and I think you mentioned it last week. You have the first half of the team, the offense is awesome and it's doing a lot of stuff, but then it doesn't happen in the second half. Like, the other team gets the ball, they hold it, and it's hard to match up. So I always say, you need that follow through, you need that score, you need that team to play really well, but then you need the other team to score, and then you need to follow through and have to get pushed in the fourth quarter, or even have that interaction where it's a 76-yard touchdown and the other team, scores on 3 plays. So it's a quick little drive, and it just makes that game have more of a over and more potential scoring in it. So, and those are hard to identify. It could have been in Baltimore, Detroit 2 weeks ago. Last week, what was the game? There was a game last week that was the Dallas game. Dallas got a big lead. Yeah, Dallas got a big lead, and the Rams just didn't do it. They did score a little bit, but it wasn't like the right players, and but then Dallas should have ran it, and it just didn't have that secondary flow that it should have. But that's what you're kind of looking for, is both teams playing well offensively. So that's kind of the trick. And I wish it was easy, but it's going to be. There's a lot of losses in this, and so unfortunately, and over time, if you do get it right, you can have a really good payday and kind of keep you alive. But it's a lot of entertainment too.
And that other game that you're talking about was the late night game with the Chargers. Herbert had almost 29 points at the half, and if you have a big half like that, you're looking for that follow through. And I think he ended up with 33 or 34 points for the week, and just couldn't get that second half push. Almost up to an hour. I did want to ask one more question. That would have been a great way to end there. But I do have to ask this question. FOMO, fear of missing out. Players that you've been on that your eyes flock to every week. The matchup looks good. This is the week. Hard to get off of them because, you were on them 3 straight weeks. And then you're like, I'm done with him. You put him to the shelf, and then he pops. How's that work, Shawn?
Yeah, that was there's probably 3 examples, probably 4 examples over the last 5 weeks that came into play. I thought Robinson was having a big game. I think it was against Houston, a favorable matchup, kind of a clunker. I think I used Olave that week. He had, played pretty well in 3 of his 4 games, had 100 yards, and, 3 of them didn't score touchdowns. Thought he had a decent matchup, didn't do it. Hey, I went with Devontae Smith that, AJ Brown's hot, the other side's going to go. He didn't do it, and then, I went with Waddle, with the game against, when they played a couple of games ago at home against, I think it was the Giants. And he started off right. He was like 7 for whatever, and he had that 7 for 50 something, that touchdown. But Hill hits on the long play, and he comes in. I was like, if I didn't try to beat the crowd with a low percentage play, rather than just using the star and working it out with Thielen on the other side, I might have had a really nice day. But so sometimes, you're trying to be against the grain and you don't get rewarded. But then there's other times that it does come in, because I think last week, I think the Washington passing game was kind of against the grain a little bit. And because, they had given up so many sacks, and then, and you get this tunnel vision of, like, even me, I'm like, oh, Philly played them a couple weeks ago and Washington scored. Now the Philly will play better. Well, the game played out almost the same as, they just Washington moved the ball a lot better, and Philly didn't have any sacks, and, Dotson had a good game, and McLaurin had a good game, but he didn't have that explosive game with 100 yards. So, it's just like, but, those type of players like the Smith, the Waddle, and whatever, they did come in last week, but I was off of them. I mean, I can't, I should have that type of thing. I could have had them both in the a team in the $20 million maker, but I didn't. And I also didn't end up doing a parlay, which if I would have done a 5-team parlay last week, I would have would have hit it and been really close. But I was knocked offline earlier at like 9:30 and I couldn't get in there and then get back in time and kind of made it messy. And it was unfortunate because I probably would have hit, but that's more of I think chasing it makes more sense maybe in the betting market because the law of averages, like, Waddle eventually is going to have a good game. Smith eventually is going to have a good game, where like this week, AJ Brown, I mean, you would think even if he's 5 for 80 and a touchdown, which is a good for us in the season long, it might be okay in the daily for at least not getting you crushed. It's still probably an under for what his projections would be, in some of the categories. So like you would think that eventually he can't come in every single week, but he has. So if they're hot, they're hot. When we were bettors, when we were trying to beat the streak, we were the wrong thing. We're supposed to ride who's playing well. We're supposed to get behind the teams that are playing well and go against the teams that are playing bad. So it's like we had the reverse mentality is like, oh, they're due to win, they're due to lose. And then that kind of outlook is just the one that is on the chaser side of mentality. So it doesn't always come in. So play who's playing hot, who's looking good, who's doing stuff. And hopefully you end up with like a Corey Seager or something like that. Just lead your team to a championship, something like that. At least baseball.
And you hit me right in the ribs, by the way, because I was high on this one guy. I didn't get him in a ton of spots where he was falling, but I thought this would be a very nice year to have Jahan Dotson as your 3, say, for instance, maybe 3 or 4, streaky quarterback play, Brian Robinson touching the ball a million times, Logan Thomas emerging a little, of course, Terry McLaurin on the left side, but your guy, Curtis Samuel, kind of being that thorn that just won't get out of the way. And then, of course, Jahan Dotson with almost 29 points last week. And listen, I'm a Sam Howell guy, by the way. I think he can make all the throws. Listen, there's no one in the NFL that's getting sacked more. I mean, he's on record pace. I feel for that guy, but he just gets up, dusts himself off, and keeps on going. So maybe Jahan Dotson for the rest of the year can keep on moving. But great point, Shawn. Great show today. It's easy to follow guys on social media. It's easy for them to tout their winning tickets. You don't see them touting their losing tickets. You've been to the big dance 3 times. You had a $300,000 score last year with DraftKings. Good friend of ours and colleague, Mr. Dave Potts, not once but twice took down the $1 million maker, one with FanDuel, one with DraftKings. I mean, for another show, we can talk about the luck involved of turning an NFBC $100,000, main event title into $2 million wins. Now he does this professionally for a living. But we won't talk about the sprinkler system going on in Colorado at 650, and the fact that he was probably the only one that didn't have a Colorado Rocky stack that day.
Yeah, he went a contrarian, and he got the right players, and his teams played well, and his ticket came in, and there was a lot of people that had outs in that game, but they still had to play the game and they still had to do something. So even though that they were close, they can't say for sure they were going to win. And that's one of those things that fell exactly into, what happened last year with Cincinnati and Buffalo, that those are unseen events that never happen. And you can't plan for it because that changed, the Cincinnati Buffalo game, that changed fantasy leagues championships. I mean, it just, those are good players on a lot of teams that were in the hunt, and the game gets wiped. And that just never happens in the NFL. So, but it worked out, and you win. You can't win one big thing until you get the first one. So he wins 100,000. He gets to play the DFS and whatever. And then, he's got a mindset of how he wants to play the game. And, he's got a system and what he's looking for. And, and if it comes in, it was. So when you go to the dog race or the horse race, you can bet on the favorites that have the speed, you could bet on the closer or the class. But if you just stay with a style that you want to do and be consistent, your style is going to come in, a certain percentage of the time. And maybe the speed up front, maybe a little more, or class is a little more chalkier sometimes. Whereas, when you're being contrarian, you're looking for something off the pace, like exactly in the dog race is like, you're looking for the dog to break out like second, looks like he's going to make the corner. And then he kind of hits some room and he's fifth and he kind of slides and he doesn't move any around, but he looked like he almost made it. So after a couple of times in a row, like maybe if he makes it, he's in the run. And that type of guy ends up being sometimes 20-1, and you hit on those, but you look for those spots. So it's, who is the Dotson you mentioned? Well, the week before he had 5 catches, 43 yards. He looked like he was trending. I had to set a lineup with him as an option. I was like, well, he looked a little better last week, so I think I got to come run him back. But if you have really good receiving options, you probably don't have that option to put him in. That particular team, he was, I think it was an auction team for Chris Schinker, actually. He kind of had similar players, but he was the guy that was, invested the most, because it was an auction, the most money on. I was like, well, I think Samuel was on the team too, actually. And I said, and Samuel was a little nicked up, and I was like, well, I think Dotson's going to kind of want to ride in that, and it was a big thing. But you're just looking for, some sort of signal, somebody's moving in the right direction or getting a better opportunity, and that's like reading between the lines. And those are, hard to identify. But they're more viable probably in the DFS market, like, because we talked about Bateman earlier, like he's kind of a quiet, hasn't really done much, but maybe pops, but the game's got to go a certain way. You could probably see in the Jigba, that game we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is that 4 for 48 and somebody got banged up and you said he was open, could have had that touchdown, or even, I think you actually said Bateman, but the Jigba showed the week before, and then he was playing, and then Metcalf got scratched, and that was like a instant signal. It's like, this guy's $3,900 in the DFS market. He's a good play along with Rice, but Rice's salary had gone up that week, so Najigba actually ended up being the better play. But you didn't know until 3:00 in the afternoon that there was a switch being made there. So, but the other thing before we disappear is that you really, between, even though we're on Friday and it's say 2:15 East Coast time, there's going to be these news that's going to float out for football that are going to change, and you got to listen to the signals. And last week, I would say I didn't listen to 2 signals. 2 things that happened. Stacy Schinker sent a text about Denver with the picture of snow, the same exact one that you did. 2 people sent me a message to try to get me off the game, but me playing football enough knows that field is probably going to be all right at 4:00 because I've been around a lot and I don't feel the snow as much. And I was right that the game looked fine when I got to it, but I didn't foresee that Kansas City was going to have the worst game. But I had a signal where I could have made a change. I didn't. Was I being stubborn? I don't know. But, the last couple of times I changed the lineup on Sunday, I've done it and been wrong. And the second one was I had Pollard with Lamb, and I like Lamb better, but I thought Pollard was kind of looked like he was trending. He had a bye week. He had that 6 for 80 on the catches there. And then, but his left tackle was out. And I thought that was more of a factor for the run game than for the passing game, even though that Darnold's a good pass rusher and stuff. So, like, I could have got off of Pollard, and I could have easily slid to Kamara or the other. There was another running back right in that range where that was like 70. Yeah, ETN. So he was like, Kamara was 7,300, ETN was 7,200, and the other, and Pollard was 75. So I could have switched to either one, and I used the team with Kamara. So, like, I had a signal to move. I didn't listen to the tea leaves, I didn't listen to the something. And that's what you got to really kind of, you don't want to jump to, like, just say this Sunday that if Pierce doesn't play and Boone starts, like, that guy doesn't jump up, or even Singletary, because they don't score enough. But he might be viable in the DFS. He's not like, it's not like you're putting in a really good player and kind of proven, you'd like to see some sort of flash. It might work out, but there's got to be a reason for it. So I think those are things that, and especially with so many injuries and the quarterbacks and something, you really got to pay attention to that little tidbits from today until Sunday. And even when our setting lineups in season long, who's hot, put them in. And then, who is the flash player that was beneficial of having success because of game flow. And I mean, game flow is a chaser game, and they got a bunch of, they threw the ball 55 times instead of like the normal 30 or 35 or something like that. So there was 20 more chances, and people did well. I think that probably fell into the situation when you were ahead of the curve for the Washington tight end, got the nice big game against Chicago because they got out to the big lead, right? But then we thought we found a really good player. They went to, I think, Atlanta, and he ended up having like one catch or something. But ultimately, you picked him up on the waiver wire, so you probably should have had somebody else in front of him, but you could have had an injury or whatever reason, so you're gravitating toward them. So so whatever case, you would have played him. But if you had, like, say, I may just say it was Kmet and him, maybe you had a better ranking player, but you played him over it, like where if you would have went back, so those are the things you gotta have to watch, and those end up being a lot of traps, and it's really hard to get those right. And it comes back to what we talked before the season is the less decisions you make, the better. And, when you're fishing on the waiver wire, trying to improve a slot in your lineup, it's not easy. And it's not a flowing where it's consistent. And I don't get it right. And I don't claim to be the best at it. I try to, obviously I look at every game and the stats and stuff like that, but it's just, you just, hopefully you draft enough good players to bridge yourself in the bye weeks, and you got a lot right on draft day, and you're only trying to get minimal help on the waiver wire, other than you might be able to fix a quarterback, because if you go to the quarterback off the waiver wire, like you lose Kirk Cousins and he scores 24 points a game, you still could get a guy that scores 18, and your team could be good enough to still hang in there and make the playoffs. But you're might need that quarterback to hit in the postseason to be a lot better to win an overall championship, or even win a league title if it's a head-to-head type of thing. So there's a couple of thoughts. I mean, like I said, football is a wild game, and it's a lot of fun. And, we have done this for a long time. I mean, we did it with, our excitement for football is so much different than most, because we played in a non-yardage league where a guy runs 55 yards, get tackled at 1 yard, and you got nothing. You need him to get the ball again. So it added a little more drama to it. I think it was fun back then, but a lot less scoring. But, we still, and that's how we progressed to this, so. But, all right, we went overtime today. So send me a check for whatever. You owe me 7 minutes and 45 seconds.
A lot of good nuggets, and I'm having that issue that you talked about, too many options. I've built a great starting lineup, and I've built a lot of depth. I was on Darrell Henderson on the waiver wire when everyone else was going for, Zach Evans or Royce Freeman. And now you throw in a Dunta Foreman, who I was wrong on all 3 weeks. Didn't have him the first week, had him the second week, and of course don't have him the third week. And then you add in a Roshan Johnson, who, by the way, the Evans kid is actually looks the best. He can catch the ball. He's looked pretty good. So a million things. That's for next week. The waiver wire, the crawl has been going the whole time. Please go follow Shawn on Twitter at Shawn_Childs. You can get all his work at Full Time Fantasy. Please go subscribe to fantasyanalysis.substack.com. Guys, it's 30 cents a day. Okay, go lift up your couch. Go into your car, look between the seats. There's 30 cents there, I guarantee it. It's like $9 a month. You can go subscribe for $100. Next week, we'll talk some more fantasy baseball, as Shawn's got his spreadsheets already out. And I do know our good friend Rick Thomas has already drafted on 3 teams already. They're talking about starting one with Mike the Mouth this weekend for number 4. So from myself, Jeff Dawson at EC Sports Investor, one and only, the Hall of Famer, Mr. Shawn Childs at Shawn_Childs. Have a good day. 3:30, 3 men in a box. Myself, Matt Grissom, and Quentin Mills will talk some NCAA football. Till then, see you soon.